What you're about to hear sounds impossible, but every word is true. On a freezing December night in 2019, two people stood on the Williamsburg Bridge in New York City. One was preparing to jump. The other couldn't see him at all. The man teetering on the edge was Marcus Whitmore Chen, the 42-year-old founder and CEO of Apex Dynamics, a fintech empire valued at $8.3 billion. He wore a $12,000 suit beneath his cashmere overcoat. His Patek Philippe watch, a gift to himself after his company's IPO, gleamed in the streetlight. In his pocket was a handwritten note, carefully folded, explaining why this was the only way out. The woman approaching with her white cane, tapping rhythmically against the concrete, was Diane Jefferson, 38 years old, blind since the age of 7. She made $43,000 a year as a crisis counselor at a community mental health center in Brooklyn. She was walking home from a double shift, exhausted, her feet aching in shoes she'd owned for 3 years because new ones weren't in the budget. Neither knew the other existed. Neither could have predicted that in 15 minutes, both of their lives would change forever. But before we get to that bridge, to that moment when everything hung in the balance, you need to understand how two people from such different worlds ended up in the exact same place at the exact same time. Because the story of what happened that night begins decades earlier, in two very different childhoods that somehow led to the same edge of the same bridge. And what Diane couldn't see that night, what her blindness allowed her to perceive, in ways that would save both their lives, starts with understanding what she lost and what she gained, the day her world went dark. Houston, Texas, summer 1988. 7-year-old Diane Jefferson loved 3 things more than anything in the world: her mother's cornbread, the way sunlight looked through the stained glass at Greater Hope Baptist Church, and drawing. She drew constantly, on napkins, in the margins of her homework, on the condensation of windows. Her second-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had told her parents that Diane had a gift for seeing the world in a special way. The irony of those words would haunt Diane's mother, Rita, for years. It started with headaches. Diane would come home from school, press her small hands against her temples, and tell her mother that her head felt too full. Rita, working 2 jobs as a home health aide and weekend custodian at a local church, assumed it was just eye strain. Maybe Diane needed glasses. The optometrist appointment was scheduled for late July. Diane never made it. On July 18, 1988, during an ordinary Tuesday evening while helping her mother shell peas on their apartment's small balcony, Diane said, "Mama, everything's getting fuzzy." She reached for a pea and missed. Reached again. Missed again. "Mama, I can't." Rita dropped the bowl. Peas scattered everywhere, rolling between the balcony rails, falling 3 stories to the courtyard below. But Rita didn't notice. She was staring at her daughter's eyes, watching as Diane's pupils dilated unnaturally, as her little girl's hands reached out, grasping at air. "Baby, look at me. Look at Mama." "I can't see you," Diane whispered. "Mama, where are you? I can't see anything." The emergency room, the CT scan, the neurologist's grave face, the words that shattered everything. Optic glioma, a rare tumor pressing on both optic nerves. They could operate, but the tumor's location made it nearly impossible to remove without causing permanent damage. They could do radiation, but at Diane's age, the side effects could be catastrophic. Rita, a single mother who'd been abandoned by Diane's father when she was 3 months pregnant, sat in that sterile consultation room and asked the only question that mattered. Will my baby girl see again? The neurologist, a kind woman named Dr. Sarah Hoffman, who Diane would later credit with saving more than just her life, didn't sugarcoat it. The pressure on her optic nerves has already caused significant damage. Even if we manage to shrink the tumor, which radiation might accomplish, the likelihood of restoring her vision is less than 5%. Rita's hand found Diane's. The little girl squeezed back, not understanding the finality in the doctor's words, still believing this was temporary, that the darkness would lift like a curtain. It never did. The next 6 months were a blur of treatments: radiation therapy that made Diane violently ill, steroids that made her face swell, hospital stays that taught her to count time by the rhythm of IV drips rather than the passage of day into night. The tumor shrank. Diane lived, but the darkness remained absolute. What happened next could have broken her. Many children in Diane's situation retreated into depression, anger, or learned helplessness. The statistics on childhood blindness were grim: higher rates of anxiety, lower educational attainment, increased social isolation. Diane's mother refused to let her daughter become a statistic. "Baby girl," Rita said one morning, 6 months after Diane's diagnosis, sitting on the edge of her daughter's hospital bed during yet another follow-up appointment. "I need you to listen to me. This thing that happened to you, it's not fair. It's not right. And if I could trade places with you, I would do it in a heartbeat. But I can't. So here's what we're going to do instead." Diane, now 8 years old, turned her face toward her mother's voice. "We're going to learn a whole new way of living. Not a worse way. Not a limited way. A different way. You're going to learn to read with your fingers. You're going to learn to move through the world with confidence. You're going to go to school with other kids, not some special place where they hide you away. And you're going to show everyone who ever doubted you exactly what Diane Jefferson can do." What Rita didn't tell her daughter, what Diane wouldn't learn until years later, was that Rita had quit her night custodian job to spend every evening learning Braille herself so she could teach Diane. That she'd fought the school district for 8 months to get Diane into mainstream classes instead of a segregated special education program. That she'd gone into debt, buying adaptive equipment insurance wouldn't cover. Rita Jefferson worked herself to exhaustion to give her daughter a chance. And Diane? She absorbed every lesson like sunlight, even though she could no longer see the sun. The Braille came quickly. Diane's fingers were nimble and sensitive from all those years of drawing, and she transferred that tactile awareness to reading. By age 9, she was reading at an 8th grade level. By 11, she'd read every book in Braille her local library could obtain and was requesting more. But reading wasn't enough. Diane wanted to move, to explore, to be independent. That's when she met Mr. Gerald Hartley, an orientation and mobility specialist who volunteered at the Texas School for the Blind. Mr. Hartley was himself blind, had been since birth, and he taught Diane something that would define the rest of her life. "The cane isn't a cage," he told her during their first session, placing the folding white cane in her small hands. "It's wings. It's information. Every tap tells you a story about the world. Concrete, grass, a curb, a step, open air. This is how you fly." Diane learned to fly. By age 12, she could navigate her entire neighborhood independently. By 14, she was taking public buses across Houston. By 16, she was the top student in her high school, not just among students with disabilities, but period. Valedictorian, National Merit Scholar, full academic scholarship to Rice University. But something else happened during those formative years, something that would prove crucial on a bridge in New York 2 decades later. Diane learned to listen, not just with her ears, though her hearing became remarkably acute. She learned to listen to what people didn't say, to the tremor in a voice that indicated fear, to the forced brightness that masked despair, to the silences that spoke volumes. She learned to read people the way sighted people read faces. You develop a different kind of sight, she would later explain. When you can't see someone's expression, you learn to hear their pain. When you can't see if someone's smiling, you learn to feel whether their words match their heart. Blindness didn't take away my ability to see people, it refined it. This ability, this heightened emotional perception, drew her toward psychology. At Rice, she majored in clinical psychology with a minor in social work. Her professors were astounded by her gift for connecting with clients during practice sessions. "It's like she can see directly into your soul," one classmate remarked. If only she'd known how literal that would become. While Diane was learning to navigate a world without sight in Houston, Marcus Whitmore Chen was growing up in privilege in Palo Alto, California. But privilege, as Marcus would learn, doesn't prevent pain. Sometimes, it just makes it harder to admit you're drowning. Marcus's father, David Chen, was a second-generation Chinese-American engineer at Hewlett-Packard. His mother, Catherine Whitmore Chen, came from old Silicon Valley money. Her grandfather had made a fortune in early semiconductor patents. They met at Stanford, married young, and had Marcus in 1977, their only child. On paper, Marcus's childhood looked perfect. Private schools, sailing lessons, summer camps at Stanford, a college fund that would eventually total over $2 million. Christmas cards featured the three of them smiling in front of their four-bedroom craftsman in one of Palo Alto's best neighborhoods. Behind closed doors, perfection had a price. David Chen was brilliant, but emotionally distant. A man who showed love through achievement rather than affection. He taught Marcus to code when he was 6 years old, not through playful games, but through rigorous lessons with clear expectations. When Marcus struggled, David's disappointment was palpable even in silence. Catherine, meanwhile, suffered from depression that manifested as emotional volatility. Some days she was warm and engaged, taking Marcus to museums and reading to him for hours. Other days, she didn't leave her bedroom, and Marcus would come home from school to find her staring out the window, unreachable. Neither parent was cruel, both loved their son. But they were locked in their own struggles, and Marcus learned early that his job was to be perfect enough, successful enough, good enough to somehow fix them. He tried. God, how he tried. Straight A's from kindergarten through high school. Captain of the debate team. First chair violin in the youth symphony. Perfect SAT scores. Early admission to Stanford at 16. And all of it felt hollow. I remember sitting at my high school graduation, Marcus would later tell a therapist, being named valedictorian, looking out at the audience and seeing my dad nodding with satisfaction. Not pride, satisfaction, like I'd finally done something correctly. And my mom was crying, but I couldn't tell if they were happy tears or sad tears, and I thought, is this it? Is this all there is? At Stanford, Marcus discovered two things that would shape his life: computer science and the intoxicating world of startups. The late 1990s in Silicon Valley was a gold rush. Kids barely old enough to drink were raising millions in venture capital. Companies with no revenue were going public for billions. The air itself seemed electric with possibility. Marcus dove in head first. At 19, he started his first company, a music-sharing platform that predated Napster by 6 months. It failed spectacularly, partly due to legal issues, partly due to Marcus's inexperience. The failure was crushing, but it taught him something crucial. He was willing to risk everything. His second attempt, a social networking site for college students, came tantalizingly close to success before being eclipsed by a small startup from Harvard called Facebook. Marcus sold his company for $3.2 million in 2005, enough to be life-changing for most people, but in Silicon Valley, it was a consolation prize. His parents were supportive in their typical fashion. His father said, "Good first exit. Next time, aim higher." His mother, in a rare moment of clarity, said, "Marcus, honey, maybe it's time to just rest? You don't have to prove anything." But he did. He always did. What nobody knew, what Marcus barely admitted to himself, was that the relentless achievement wasn't about ambition anymore. It was about running. From the emptiness, from the gnawing sense that despite all his advantages, all his talents, all his successes, there was something fundamentally wrong with him. He buried himself in work on his third venture, Apex Dynamics. Apex Dynamics started in 2008, right as the financial crisis was imploding the global economy. While banks were collapsing and unemployment was skyrocketing, Marcus saw an opportunity. The insight was simple but powerful. Traditional banking had failed to serve small businesses and individuals during the crisis. What if there was a technology-first financial services platform that could provide faster loans, better rates, and more transparent terms? Marcus coded the initial prototype in his apartment, surviving on ramen and coffee, working 18-hour days. He brought in 2 Stanford classmates, David Park and Jennifer Wu, as co-founders. They launched a beta version in early 2009. Within 6 months, they had 10,000 users. Within a year, 100,000. The venture capital came pouring in, $5 million in Series A funding, $25 million in Series B, $120 million in Series C. Each round valued the company higher, and each round demanded more of Marcus. He became the face of Apex Dynamics, the young genius disrupting an ossified industry. TechCrunch featured him on their cover. He spoke at conferences. He hired hundreds of employees. The company grew from 3 people in an apartment to 500 people across 3 office buildings. His personal net worth, on paper, climbed into the hundreds of millions. He was 33 years old, and by every external measure, he'd achieved the success he'd always chased. So why did he feel like he was dying inside? The answer was simple, though Marcus couldn't see it at the time. He'd built his entire identity around achievement, and achievement had become an addiction. Each success created a temporary high, followed by a crash that demanded a bigger success to feel normal again. He started sleeping 4 hours a night, then 3, then 2. He stopped seeing friends, not that he had many real friends anyway. His relationships were transactional, investors to impress, employees to manage, competitors to outmaneuver. He dated, occasionally, but the relationships never lasted. How could they? He was never really present. His mind was always on the next product launch, the next funding round, the next acquisition target. His parents noticed the toll. His mother, in one of her lucid periods, called him and said, "Marcus, you sound exhausted. When was the last time you took a day off?" "I'm fine, Mom." "You don't sound fine. You sound like you're burning out." I said I'm fine. He wasn't fine, but he didn't know how to be anything other than productive, driven, successful. Those were the only versions of himself he knew how to be. In 2015, Apex Dynamics went public. The IPO raised $1.2 billion. Marcus's personal stake was worth $3.4 billion on day 1. He was 38 years old, a billionaire, a success story that business schools would study. He felt nothing. Actually, that's not quite true. He felt a creeping dread that whispered, "Now what? You've won. You've made it. So why do you still feel empty?" But he couldn't slow down, because slowing down meant facing that question. So he worked harder, pushed for aggressive expansion, made increasingly risky bets, started taking on competitors in brutal market battles that he didn't need to fight but couldn't resist. The company was thriving. Marcus was crumbling. While Marcus was building his empire in Silicon Valley, Diane was building something quieter, but no less significant in New York City: a life of purpose. After graduating summa cum laude from Rice in 2003, Diane faced a choice. She'd been accepted to several prestigious graduate programs in clinical psychology, including Columbia and NYU. But she'd also received a job offer from a small nonprofit in Brooklyn called Hope Horizon Community Services. The salary was terrible: $28,000 a year. The hours would be brutal. The population they served, homeless individuals, domestic violence survivors, people in acute mental health crises, was challenging and often heartbreaking. Rita, her mother, visited her in Houston before she had to decide. They sat in Diane's tiny apartment, drinking sweet tea on a sweltering August evening. "Baby girl, you've got options now, real options. You could go to one of those fancy schools, get your doctorate, become Dr. Jefferson. Nothing wrong with wanting something better." Diane ran her fingers over the acceptance letters embossed in Braille. "What if better isn't what I need? What if I'm supposed to help people who don't have options?" Rita was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That's my daughter, always seeing what others don't." Diane moved to New York in September 2003, one suitcase and her white cane, taking the overnight bus because it was cheaper than flying. She'd never been to New York. She couldn't see the skyline or the bustling streets or any of the visual chaos that overwhelmed most first-time visitors. But she could hear it, feel it, sense the energy. This was her city now. Hope Horizon operated out of a converted warehouse in Bedford-Stuyvesant, back when Bed-Stuy was still rough around the edges, before the gentrification would transform it. The facility offered crisis intervention, temporary housing, job placement assistance, and mental health counseling. Diane's job was officially intake counselor, but it quickly became so much more. She had a gift. Clients who were defensive and hostile with other counselors would open up to her. Men who refused to discuss their trauma would find themselves talking to this blind woman who somehow made them feel safe enough to be vulnerable. "It's because you can't see me," one client told her during a session. "I don't have to worry about the judgment on your face. I can just be honest." But it was more than that. Diane's blindness forced clients to communicate verbally, fully, rather than relying on visual cues. And Diane's ability to listen, really listen, to hear the pain beneath the words, created a space where healing could begin. She heard the tremor in a domestic violence survivor's voice when she said she was fine and knew to push deeper. She heard the forced cheerfulness in a suicidal client's tone and knew to ask the hard questions. She heard the exhaustion in a homeless veteran's gratitude and knew he was on the verge of giving up. Her colleagues were in awe. Her supervisor, a gruff former social worker named Tom Rodriguez, pulled her aside after 6 months. "Jefferson, I've been doing this work for 23 years. I've seen hundreds of counselors come through here. You're different. You see things the rest of us miss." "I don't see anything," Diane said with a slight smile. "You know what I mean. You should get your clinical license. You're too good at this to stay at intake level." Diane took his advice. She enrolled in a part-time MSW program at Hunter College, attending classes at night while working full-time during the day. It took her 4 years, twice as long as the traditional program, but she graduated with her master's in social work in 2007, then passed her licensing exam to become an LCSW in 2008. By then, she'd been promoted twice at Hope Horizon. She was running the crisis intervention team, supervising other counselors, and handling the most difficult cases, clients in acute crisis, often suicidal, who needed immediate intervention. She was good at it, exceptionally good. "I can't explain it," she told her mother during one of their weekly phone calls. "When I'm sitting with someone who's in pain, who's desperate, who's lost all hope, I can feel it, not just hear it, feel it, and somehow I can reach them." What Diane didn't tell her mother, what she barely admitted to herself, was how much those sessions took out of her. She was absorbing other people's pain daily, sometimes multiple times a day. She'd come home to her small studio apartment in Crown Heights, emotionally depleted, and sit in the darkness, which for her was the same as light, trying to decompress. She didn't have many close friends. Dating was complicated, navigating the awkwardness of disclosing her blindness, dealing with men who either fetishized it or were uncomfortable with it. She'd had a few relationships over the years, but nothing that lasted. The truth was, her work was her life. And while it was meaningful, it was also isolating. But Diane had learned long ago to find joy in small things. The feel of a good book in Braille, the taste of her mother's cornbread when Rita visited twice a year, the satisfaction of a client calling months after their last session to say, "I just wanted you to know, I'm doing better because of you." It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't lucrative, but it mattered. And mattering, Diane believed, was enough. By 2017, Marcus Whitmore Chen had everything he'd ever wanted, and nothing that actually made him happy. Apex Dynamics was dominating the fintech space. The company had expanded into cryptocurrency, wealth management, and AI-driven trading algorithms. Revenue was approaching $2 billion annually. Marcus's personal net worth had climbed above $5 billion. He owned a penthouse in Tribeca, worth $18 million. A house in the Hamptons, a retreat in Aspen, a collection of vintage Porsches he never drove. He could buy anything, go anywhere, meet anyone. He was profoundly, desperately alone. The work that had once energized him now felt mechanical. The board meetings, the investor calls, the product launches. It was all going through motions. He had a team of executives who could run the company without him. But letting go felt like admitting he was unnecessary. And if he wasn't necessary to Apex Dynamics, who was he? His parents were both dead by then. His father had died of a heart attack in 2014, having never quite overcome his emotional distance. At the funeral, Marcus realized he'd never had a real conversation with the man. His mother had succumbed to her depression in 2016, a carefully managed overdose of prescription medications. Her suicide note was addressed to Marcus, but it was just one sentence. "I'm sorry, I couldn't be what you needed." The guilt from that sentence would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. He threw himself even deeper into work, but the emptiness grew. He started having panic attacks, sudden, overwhelming waves of anxiety that left him gasping for air in the middle of board meetings. He'd excuse himself, lock himself in a bathroom, and wait for his heart rate to return to normal. He saw a therapist briefly. The therapist suggested meditation, work-life balance, possibly medication for anxiety and depression. Marcus canceled the therapy after 3 sessions. He told himself he didn't have time. The truth was, he was terrified of what he'd find if he stopped running long enough to look inward. In early 2019, something shifted. Or maybe it didn't shift. Maybe it crystallized. Marcus realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt genuine joy. Not satisfaction at a successful product launch, not the rush of closing a deal, but actual joy. He started having intrusive thoughts. What if he just stopped? Not just stopped working, but stopped everything. The thoughts became more frequent, more specific, more seductive. By December 2019, Marcus had developed a plan. He didn't think of it as suicide at first. He thought of it as an exit strategy, a way out of a life that had become unbearable. He wrote careful instructions for his estate. He wrote letters to his executive team, to his board of directors, to the few people he considered something approximating friends. He wrote a public statement for the press. He didn't write about the emptiness or the pain or the exhaustion. He framed it all in terms of stepping back and new chapters. Even in planning his death, Marcus was managing his image. On December 15, 2019, a Sunday evening, Marcus sat in his Tribeca penthouse and reviewed everything. His affairs were in order. His death would create some chaos for the company, but they'd survive. They'd probably thrive without him. That thought, that Apex Dynamics would be fine, possibly better without him, felt both devastating and liberating. He put on his most expensive suit, his favorite watch, his cashmere overcoat. If he was going to do this, he'd do it with the same attention to detail he brought to everything else. He left his apartment at 11:43 p.m., according to the doorman's later testimony. He walked through the freezing December night, his breath visible in the cold air, and made his way to the Williamsburg Bridge. The bridge was nearly empty at that hour on a Sunday night. Just a few cars, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Marcus climbed over the pedestrian railing and stood on the thin ledge on the bridge's edge. The East River was far below, dark and cold and final. He thought, "This is it. This is the only decision I've ever made that can't be undone." And it felt like peace. Diane Jefferson was exhausted. She'd worked a double shift at Hope Horizon. Her colleague had called in sick, and there was nobody else to cover the crisis hotline. 16 hours of listening to pain, absorbing trauma, holding space for people in their darkest moments. She was walking home because the subway was shut down for maintenance. The walk from Hope Horizon to her apartment was about 40 minutes. She'd done it hundreds of times. Her white cane tapped rhythmically against the pavement. Left, center, right. Left, center, right. The familiar pattern that told her where she was in space. She was crossing the Williamsburg Bridge when she heard it. Not a sound, exactly. More like an absence of sound. A held breath in the universe. Diane stopped walking. Her cane had detected the railing. Normal. But there was something else. A presence. Someone nearby, but not moving. Not walking. Just there. "Hello?" Diane called out. No response. She could hear breathing. Rapid. Shallow. The breathing of someone in acute distress. Diane's professional training kicked in immediately. She'd heard that breathing pattern thousands of times. Crisis. Panic. Often prelude to self-harm. "I know someone's there," she said calmly. "You don't have to say anything. But I'm going to come a little closer, okay?" She moved carefully, her cane sweeping ahead of her, until she found the railing. Her hands traced it. Solid metal. And then, nothing. Air. Open space. Someone was on the other side of the railing. Diane's heart rate spiked, but her voice remained steady. "I'm Diane. I can't see you, but I can hear you breathing. Are you okay?" From the darkness, a man's voice, hoarse, defeated. "Go away." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Diane said. "This is my route home. I walk this bridge almost every day. I know every inch of it. And I know that you're standing somewhere you shouldn't be. It's none of your business. You're right. It isn't. But here's the thing. I'm a crisis counselor. Helping people in the worst moments of their lives is literally my job. So even though it's midnight and I'm exhausted and my feet hurt and all I want to do is go home and sleep, I can't just walk past someone who's in pain." Silence. But he was still there, still breathing, still alive. Diane continued, "I'm going to sit down right here on my side of the railing, and I'm going to tell you a story. You don't have to talk. You don't have to do anything. But I'm asking you to just listen. Can you do that?" Another long silence, then barely audible. "Why?" "Because," Diane said, carefully sitting down on the cold concrete, her back against the railing. "I used to be where you are, not on a bridge, but in that place where life feels like it's not worth living anymore. And someone sat with me until I could see a reason to stay. And now I'm going to sit with you." She couldn't see Marcus's face. couldn't see the tears streaming down his cheeks, couldn't see the way his hand gripped the metal railing so hard his knuckles were white. But she could hear his breathing change, slightly, just a fraction, and she began to talk. "I was 7 years old when I lost my sight," Diane began, her voice carrying clearly in the cold December air. "One day, I could see colors and shapes and my mother's face. The next day, nothing. Just darkness. Forever." Marcus, standing on the ledge, wanted to tell her to stop, to go away, to leave him alone in his final moments. But something in her voice, calm, unbothered by his silence, present without pressure, made him stay quiet. I remember the doctor telling my mother I'd never see again. I remember my mother crying, trying to hide it from me, but I could hear it in her voice. I remember thinking my life was over, that I'd never be normal, never be happy, never be anything. Diane paused, adjusting her position slightly against the cold metal. I remember lying in my hospital bed, 8 years old, thinking that it would be easier to just stop, to not have to face a world I couldn't see, to not have to be a burden to my mother who was already struggling. I remember planning it, actually, how I could do it, when I could do it. Marcus's grip on the railing loosened slightly. "You want to know what stopped me?" Diane asked. "Not some grand revelation, not some inspirational moment. It was small, stupid small. A nurse came in to check my vitals. She had a kind voice, and she asked me what I liked to eat. And I said cornbread, my mama's cornbread." Diane smiled at the memory. And this nurse, her name was Valerie, I'll never forget her. She said, "Girl, if your mama makes good cornbread, you've got something worth living for." And then she laughed. This big, genuine laugh, like cornbread was the most important thing in the world. "That's ridiculous," Marcus said suddenly, his first real words beyond telling her to leave. "It is ridiculous," Diane agreed. "Completely ridiculous. Staying alive for cornbread." But that night, when I was alone again, planning again, I thought about that cornbread. And I thought, maybe I should have it one more time before I go. Just one more time. She paused. And the next morning, my mama brought me cornbread. And it was good. So good. And I thought, maybe one more time tomorrow. And then tomorrow came. And I thought it again. And then something strange happened. What? Despite himself, Marcus was listening. I realized that even though I couldn't see anymore, I could still experience things. I could taste cornbread. I could feel my mother's hand holding mine. I could hear music. I could smell rain coming. All these little things I'd never really paid attention to when I could see became vivid, important, worth experiencing. Diane turned her face toward where she sensed Marcus was standing, though she couldn't see him. "I'm not saying my life became easy. It didn't. Learning to be blind was the hardest thing I've ever done. There were days I hated it. Days I was angry at God, at the universe, at my own body for betraying me. Days I still thought about giving up." "Then why didn't you?" Marcus asked quietly. "Because I realized something. The darkness I was living in, the literal darkness of blindness, wasn't the worst darkness I could experience. The worst darkness was the one inside my head. The one that told me I was worthless, that I'd never matter, that I was better off dead." She shifted position again. "And here's the thing about that internal darkness. It lies. It's a very convincing liar, but it's still lying. It told me I'd never be independent. I learned to navigate New York City alone. It told me I'd never be educated. I graduated summa cum laude. It told me I'd never help anyone. I've spent 15 years counseling people in crisis." "Good for you," Marcus said, but there was no real bitterness in it, just exhaustion. I'm not telling you this to brag, Diane said gently. I'm telling you this because that voice in your head right now, the one telling you that this is the only way out, I know that voice. It's in my head too sometimes. It's a liar. You don't know anything about my life, Marcus said. You're right. I don't. Want to tell me? Silence. Then, to his own surprise, Marcus started talking. I have $5 billion, Marcus said. Give or take. Okay, Diane said neutrally. I have a company valued at $15 billion, 2,000 employees, investors around the world. I've been on the cover of Forbes, Time, the Wall Street Journal. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And you're on a bridge at midnight, Diane said quietly. Yeah. So money didn't fix it. Marcus laughed, a broken sound. Money didn't fix anything. It just made it harder to admit something was wrong. Because how do you explain to people that you have everything and feel nothing? How do you say, I'm suicidal when you're a billionaire? Everyone thinks money solves everything. Does it solve anything? Diane asked. Marcus considered this. It solves practical problems. I never worry about rent or food or medical bills. But it doesn't solve the emptiness. It doesn't make you less alone. If anything, it makes it worse, because you can't tell if anyone actually cares about you or just your money. Do you have anyone in your life who knows the real you? Diane asked. I don't think there is a real me, Marcus said. I've been performing my entire life. Perfect son, perfect student, perfect CEO. I don't know who I am when I'm not achieving something. And you're tired of performing, Diane said. It wasn't a question. I'm so fucking tired, Marcus's voice cracked. I'm tired of board meetings and investor calls and pretending I care about quarterly earnings. I'm tired of being responsible for 2,000 people's livelihoods. I'm tired of being Marcus Whitmore Chen, genius billionaire entrepreneur. I just want to stop. Stopping doesn't have to mean dying, Diane said. Doesn't it? What's the alternative? Step down from my company? Disappoint everyone who's counting on me? Admit I'm a fraud who's been running on empty for years? Is admitting you're struggling really worse than jumping off a bridge? Marcus didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was small. At least jumping is decisive. It's final. It's over. Living means facing the fact that I've wasted my life chasing things that don't matter. Have you wasted it? Diane asked. Or have you just been looking for meaning in the wrong places? What's the right place? I don't know, Diane admitted. I think it's different for everyone. But I know it's not an achievement or money or other people's approval. Those things are fine, but they're empty if that's all there is. She paused, then continued. You know what I think. I think you're on this bridge because you've been running so hard for so long that you forgot to ask yourself what you're running toward. You've only been running away from things. From disappointment. From failure. From feeling like you're not enough. Marcus felt something break open inside him. How do you know that? Because I've sat with hundreds of people in crisis, and the ones who are most at risk, they're not the ones with the hardest lives. They're the ones who've lost touch with why they're living in the first place. The ones who've been meeting everyone else's expectations and ignoring their own needs until there's nothing left. So what do I do? Marcus asked, and for the first time in years, he sounded young, vulnerable, lost. Right now, you step back over that railing, you sit down next to me, and we figure out what comes next. I don't know if I can. Can't step over, or can't figure out what comes next? Both. Diane stood up slowly, using her cane for balance. She moved carefully along the railing until she was as close to Marcus as she could get, while staying on the safe side. Here's what I know, she said. You're still here. You're still talking to me. Part of you. Maybe a very small part. but it's there. Wants to live. That part is worth listening to. What if that part is wrong? What if it's not? What if that small voice that made you hesitate, that made you answer when I called out to you, that made you tell me your story? What if that's actually the truest part of you? The part that hasn't been corrupted by performance or pressure or other people's expectations? Marcus was crying now, not dramatically, just tears sliding down his face in the cold. I don't know how to be anything other than what I've been, he whispered. Then maybe it's time to learn, Diane said. And learning starts with staying alive. She extended her hand over the railing, reaching toward where she sensed he was. Take my hand, please. Let me help you back over. Marcus looked at her hand, looked down at the dark water below, looked back at her hand. This woman couldn't see him, didn't know who he was, wasn't impressed by his wealth or his achievements. She just knew he was in pain, and she'd stopped to help. When was the last time someone had really seen him? Not Marcus, the CEO, not Marcus, the billionaire, just Marcus, the human being who was hurting. He couldn't remember. Slowly, carefully, Marcus reached out and took Diane's hand. Her grip was strong. Sure, despite her blindness, she guided him back over the railing with confidence, helping him find his footing on the solid ground of the pedestrian walkway. When he was safely over, his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the cold concrete, and Diane sat down beside him. They sat in silence for several minutes. Marcus was shaking, from cold, from adrenaline, from the enormity of what he'd almost done. Finally, Diane spoke. "What's your name?" "Marcus." "Well, Marcus, I'm glad you're still here." "I don't know if I am," Marcus said. "Glad, I mean." "That's okay. You don't have to be glad right now. You just have to be alive. The rest we can work on." Diane didn't leave Marcus on that bridge. She called a mobile crisis unit, colleagues from her field who responded to mental health emergencies. She stayed with him until they arrived, sitting in the cold, occasionally talking, often just being present. When the crisis counselors arrived, Marcus finally asked the question that had been gnawing at him. "Why did you stop? You said you walk this bridge all the time. You could have just kept walking, pretended you didn't notice me. Why did you stop?" Diane smiled. "Because I know what it's like to be in that dark place. And I know that sometimes the only thing standing between life and death is one person who cares enough to stop. You don't even know me. I know you're in pain. That's enough." The crisis team took Marcus to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation and stabilization. Diane gave them her contact information as a professional reference and for continuity of care. She didn't expect to hear from Marcus again. In her line of work, you helped people in their worst moments, and then you let them go. Sometimes you never knew if they made it, if they healed, if they found their way back to life. But 3 days later, her phone rang. "Is this Diane Jefferson?" The voice was familiar, though she couldn't immediately place it. "Speaking." "This is Marcus, from the bridge." Diane sat up straighter in her desk chair at Hope Horizon. "Marcus, I'm glad to hear from you. How are you doing?" I don't know. Better than Sunday, I guess. They kept me in the hospital for 72 hours. I'm out now, in an outpatient program." "That's good. Are you safe?" "Yeah. I mean, I'm not on a bridge, so that's progress, right?" He tried to laugh, but it came out strained. "It's definitely progress," Diane said gently. "What can I do for you?" "I don't know. I wanted to thank you. Properly. And ask if maybe we could talk again? Not as a counselor-client thing. Just talk?" This was unusual. Diane maintained professional boundaries carefully, but something about Marcus's request felt genuine. And honestly, she'd been thinking about him too, wondering if he was okay. "I could do that," she said. Coffee sometime? Yeah, coffee. That would be good. They met the following Saturday at a small cafe in Brooklyn. Marcus arrived early, nervous in a way he hadn't been nervous in years. He'd Googled Diane after their encounter, discovered she worked at Hope Horizon, learned a little about her background. But he realized he didn't actually know her at all. When she arrived, tapping her cane through the door, Marcus stood up automatically, then felt foolish. How would she even know he was standing? "Marcus," she called out. "Over here," he said. "Back corner table." She navigated to him with impressive skill, and he found himself pulling out a chair, then wondering if that was condescending. Diane smiled as if reading his thoughts. "You can relax. I don't bite." They ordered coffee. And then, for the first time in his adult life, Marcus had a conversation with someone who couldn't see his expensive watch, his designer clothes, or the markers of wealth that usually defined how people interacted with him. Diane just listened to his voice, asked questions, responded to his actual words rather than his status. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. "I don't know what I'm doing," Marcus admitted after they'd been talking for an hour. "I stepped down as CEO of my company. My board thinks I'm taking a medical leave for burnout, which isn't entirely untrue. But I don't know what comes next." "What do you want to come next?" Diane asked. "I have no idea. I've spent my entire life working toward building something big, and I did it, and it nearly killed me. So what now? I can't go back to that. But I don't know how to be anything else." "Maybe you don't need to know right now," Diane said. "Maybe you just need to be for a while, without performing, without building, just being." "I don't know how to do that." Neither did I at first. After I lost my sight, I had to completely relearn how to exist in the world. It was terrifying, but it was also necessary. Marcus stirred his coffee. "You said on the bridge that you realized darkness was revealing things you couldn't see before. What did you mean by that?" Diane considered the question. "When I lost my physical sight, I gained a different kind of vision. I started noticing things I'd overlooked before. The emotion in someone's voice, the energy in a room, the small kindnesses people show each other. All the things I'd missed when I was distracted by visual information." "So your blindness was actually a gift?" Marcus asked skeptically. "No," Diane said firmly. "My blindness is a disability. It makes parts of my life harder. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. But like any challenge, it also taught me things. Developed capacities I might not have discovered otherwise. The gift wasn't the blindness itself. It was what I chose to do with it." She leaned forward slightly. "You've lost something too, Marcus. Maybe not your sight, but your illusions. About what success means, about what matters, about who you are. That loss is painful, but it's also an opportunity to build something new, something real. What if I don't know what's real anymore? Then you figure it out. One day at a time, one conversation at a time, one decision at a time." That coffee meeting became a regular thing. Every Saturday, Marcus and Diane would meet at the same cafe. At first, Marcus did most of the talking, unpacking his childhood, his relationship with his parents, his relentless drive to achieve, his inability to feel satisfied with anything he accomplished. Diane listened without judgment, asked clarifying questions, gently challenged his assumptions. "You keep saying you wasted your life," she observed during their fourth meeting. "But you built a company that employs 2,000 people. That provides financial services to people who banks ignore. That's not nothing. It feels like nothing when I was only doing it to prove something to myself. So do it for different reasons now." Marcus looked at her. "What do you mean?" "You have resources most people can't imagine. Influence, connections. What if you use those things for something that actually matters to you? Not for recognition or achievement, but because it aligns with who you want to be. The idea was radical to Marcus. He'd always thought of his wealth and success as trophies to collect or burdens to bear. The idea of using them purposefully, intentionally, for something meaningful, it hadn't occurred to him. "Like what?" he asked. "I don't know. What makes you angry? What breaks your heart? What do you wish existed in the world that doesn't?" Marcus thought about it, and the answer came surprisingly quickly. "Loneliness," he said. "Isolation. I look around at this city, millions of people, all disconnected. Everyone so focused on achievement and success and status that we've forgotten how to actually connect with each other. I was dying inside while surrounded by people, and nobody noticed, or maybe they noticed, but didn't know what to do about it." Diane nodded. "That's real. That matters. But what am I supposed to do about it? Loneliness isn't a problem you can code a solution for." "Maybe not. But you could create spaces for connection, fund programs that bring people together, support mental health initiatives that address isolation." Over the next few months, Marcus began to do exactly that. He started small, funding a pilot program at Hope Horizon that expanded their crisis intervention services. He donated anonymously at first, not wanting recognition, just wanting to help. But Diane encouraged him to be more public about it. "You have a platform," she said. "Use it. There are probably thousands of people like you, successful, accomplished, and deeply unhappy. If you talk openly about your struggle, about getting help, about finding meaning beyond achievement, you might help them too." Marcus was terrified of being that vulnerable publicly, but he trusted Diane, and he was learning that the things that terrified him were often the things he most needed to do. In June 2020, Marcus published an essay in the New York Times titled "The View from the Bridge, A Billionaire's Mental Health Crisis." He told his story. All of it. The depression, the suicide attempt, the woman who stopped to help him. The response was overwhelming. His inbox flooded with messages from people who understood, who'd been where he was, who needed to know they weren't alone. The essay changed something in Marcus. For the first time in his life, he was being seen for his vulnerability rather than his achievements, and people were responding with compassion rather than judgment. He realized that Diane had been right. His resources, not just his money, but his story, his platform, his experience, could actually help people. He established the Whitmore Chen Foundation, focused on mental health and social connection. The foundation funded crisis intervention programs, loneliness research, community building initiatives, and therapy access for underserved populations. But Marcus didn't just write checks. He showed up. He volunteered at Hope Horizon, learning from Diane and her colleagues how to actually be present with people in crisis. He was terrible at it initially. His instinct was to solve problems, not just witness pain. But he learned. Diane supervised his training with a combination of patience and candor. "Stop trying to fix everyone," she told him after one particularly rough shift. "Sometimes people just need to be heard." "But listening doesn't solve anything," Marcus protested. "Listening solves loneliness. It solves feeling invisible. It solves the desperate isolation that makes people want to die. You, of all people, should understand that." He did understand, because on that bridge, Diane hadn't fixed anything. She'd just been present, and her presence had saved his life. Marcus also reconnected with Apex Dynamics, but in a different role. He returned to the company as a board advisor rather than CEO, focusing on the company's social impact rather than its profits. He pushed for better employee mental health benefits, more generous parental leave, and a 4-day workweek experiment. His board thought he'd lost his mind. The employees loved him for it. 2 years after their meeting on the bridge, Marcus and Diane were having their regular Saturday coffee when Marcus asked a question that had been nagging at him. "Do Do you ever resent it? Your blindness? Diane tilted her head, considering. That's a complicated question. Do I wish I could see? Sometimes, yes. There are things I miss. Sunsets. My mother's face. The way my apartment looks. But resenting it feels like resenting part of myself. My blindness has shaped who I am. It's taught me to pay attention differently, to value connection over appearance, to develop capacities I might not have otherwise. She paused. Why do you ask? Because I've been thinking about that night on the bridge, about how your blindness was actually the reason you stopped. You couldn't see that I was well-dressed, successful-looking, probably not the type of person who needs help. You just heard distress, and you responded to the person, not the persona. That's true, Diane acknowledged. So in a weird way, your blindness saved my life, because a sighted person might have walked past, assumed I was fine, not wanted to get involved with someone who looked like they had it all together. Maybe, Diane said. Or maybe a sighted person would have stopped too. You can't know. But I do know this. My blindness isn't what made me stop. My humanity made me stop. My blindness just meant I saw your humanity instead of your status. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I want to help you, he said finally. You already have. Our conversations have meant a lot to me. No, I mean practically. You're still working 60-hour weeks for $43,000 a year. You live in a studio apartment in Crown Heights. You deserve better. Diane's expression grew serious. Marcus, I appreciate the sentiment, but I don't need to be rescued. I have the life I've chosen. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. I'm not trying to rescue you, Marcus said quickly. I'm trying to honor what you did for me. You saved my life. Let me make your life easier. The best way you can honor what happened that night is to keep doing what you're doing. Keep showing up. Keep being vulnerable. Keep helping other people who are where you were. That matters more than money. Why can't I do both? Diane smiled. Okay, fair point. But if you want to help me, don't make it about charity. Make it about partnership. What do you mean? The Whitmore Chen Foundation is doing good work, but it could do more. You need someone who understands mental health from the inside, who knows what people in crisis actually need, who can help you avoid the mistakes wealthy people often make when trying to help. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying hire me. Make me the foundation's director of programs. Pay me a fair salary for my expertise. Let me help you build something that actually works. Marcus felt something light up inside him. You'd leave Hope Horizon? I love Hope Horizon. But I could help more people through your foundation. Reach people who wouldn't normally access mental health services. Create systemic change instead of just crisis intervention. When can you start? 5 years after the night on the bridge, Marcus and Diane stood together at the grand opening of the Connection Center, the Whitmore Chen Foundation's flagship program in Brooklyn. The center was revolutionary, a space designed to address loneliness and social isolation through multiple approaches. There were drop-in support groups, crisis counseling, community meals, skills workshops, and quiet spaces for people who just needed somewhere to be. Everything was designed with accessibility in mind: braille signage, audio cues, tactile pathways. Diane had insisted on it. If we're building a space for everyone, she'd said, then we need to actually include everyone. The center served everyone from homeless individuals to isolated seniors to burned-out professionals. Economic status didn't matter. All were welcome. Marcus gave the opening remarks. 5 years ago, he would have prepared a polished speech designed to impress. Today, he just spoke from the heart. 5 years ago, I stood on a bridge ready to end my life. I had everything society tells us we should want, and I felt nothing. I was convinced that my pain was unfixable, that there was no way out except death. He paused. finding Diane in the crowd. She was standing near the front, her white cane folded at her side, a small smile on her face. A woman I'd never met stopped that night. She couldn't see me, but she saw me in ways nobody else had. She didn't try to fix me. She didn't tell me I shouldn't feel the way I felt. She just sat with me in my pain until I could see a reason to keep living. His voice grew thick with emotion. That woman taught me that the opposite of loneliness isn't company. It's connection. Real connection. The kind where someone sees past your achievements and your failures and your masks and recognizes your humanity. He gestured to the building behind him. This center exists because I learned that lesson. Because Diane taught me that everyone, regardless of their bank account or their success or their struggles, deserves to be seen, to be heard, to be met in their humanity. After the ceremony, as people toured the facility, Diane and Marcus stood together in the quiet garden space behind the building. "Thank you," Marcus said simply. "For what?" "For stopping. For staying. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself." Diane reached out and found his hand. "You did the hard part. You chose to live. You chose to heal. You chose to build something meaningful. I just held up a mirror." "Some mirror," Marcus said. "You showed me who I could be, not who I was." "No," Diane corrected gently. "I showed you who you already were underneath all the performance. The person who actually cares about people, who wants to make a difference, who's capable of connection. That person was always there. You just couldn't see him." Marcus looked at this remarkable woman who'd saved his life without even trying, who'd refused to let him disappear into his pain, who'd insisted he had value beyond his achievements. "What you couldn't see that night on the bridge," he said, "was that you were saving someone who'd later help save hundreds of others. The ripple effects of your choice to stop are still spreading." Diane smiled. "That's the thing about kindness, about choosing to see people's humanity. You never know where it leads. You just know it matters." In the years that followed, the Whitmore Chen Foundation became one of the most respected mental health organizations in the country. Under Diane's leadership as executive director, they opened 17 connection centers across major cities. They trained thousands of crisis counselors. They lobbied for policy changes that expanded mental health care access. But the numbers didn't tell the whole story. The real story was in the individual lives touched, the lonely senior who found community at a connection center and stopped wanting to die. The burned-out lawyer who attended a support group and realized she wasn't alone. The homeless veteran who received crisis counseling and started rebuilding his life. Marcus often worked alongside Diane, though he maintained his role as board chair while she ran operations. Their partnership was rooted in deep mutual respect and genuine friendship. They'd learned to read each other without words. Marcus could tell from Diane's tone when she was exhausted and needed to delegate. Diane could hear in Marcus's voice when his old patterns of overwork and perfectionism were creeping back. They kept each other accountable, kept each other human. Marcus still had hard days, days when the emptiness crept back, when achievement felt more attractive than connection, when he wondered if he'd ever fully heal. But he'd built a life that could hold those hard days without collapsing under them. He had purpose now. Real purpose. Not the manufactured purpose of quarterly earnings, but the deep satisfaction of knowing his life mattered to others. Diane had hard days too. Days when her blindness felt like a burden rather than just a fact of her existence. Days when she was tired of navigating a world designed for sighted people. Days when she wondered if she was making any real difference. But then she'd remember that night on the bridge, how close Marcus had been to death, how far he'd come since then, how many lives had been changed because she'd stopped walking that cold December night. Her choice to stop had mattered more than she could have imagined. 10 years after their first meeting, on the anniversary of that night, Marcus and Diane returned to the Williamsburg Bridge together. It was another cold December evening. The bridge looked the same, the city lights reflected on the East River far below, but everything was different. "I think about it sometimes," Marcus said, looking at the spot where he'd climbed over the railing. "How close I came, how easily I could have been another statistic." "But you weren't," Diane said firmly. "You're here. You're alive. You're making a difference. Because you stopped." "I stopped because someone stopped for me once," Diane said. "That nurse who asked me about cornbread. My mother who refused to let me give up. Mr. Hartley who taught me to be independent. We're all connected, Marcus. Every act of kindness creates ripples we never see." Marcus turned to her. "What you couldn't see that night, what your blindness prevented you from seeing, was a wealthy, successful man who didn't look like he needed help. If you'd been able to see me, would you have stopped?" Diane smiled. "I'd like to think I would have, but honestly, I don't know. My blindness forced me to pay attention to what mattered, the sound of someone in pain. Not their appearance or their perceived status, just their humanity. So your blindness gave me a second chance at life." "No," Diane said. "Your choice to take my hand gave you a second chance. My choice to stop just gave you the opportunity to choose." They stood together in comfortable silence, two people from different worlds who'd found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful in the light. Marcus thought about the thousands of people who'd walked through Connection Center doors, the lives saved, the pain witnessed and held, the community built. All of it traced back to this moment, this bridge, this encounter. "Thank you," he said again, "for everything." Diane squeezed his arm. "Thank you for choosing to live, for doing the hard work of healing, for using your pain to help others." She paused, then added, "You know what the real gift is? Not that I stopped, not even that you chose to live. The real gift is that we both learned to see differently. I learned to see success and wealth as hollow without connection. You learned to see that your value isn't in your achievements, it's in your humanity. What we couldn't see," Marcus said slowly, "was more important than what we could." "Exactly." As they walked back across the bridge together, Diane with her cane, Marcus beside her, neither could see the lives they'd already touched, the futures they'd altered, the hope they'd restored. But they could feel it, in the warmth of their friendship, in the satisfaction of meaningful work, in the knowledge that they'd taken their pain and transformed it into purpose. The bridge that had nearly been Marcus's end became the beginning of both their legacies. And the darkness that Diane had lived in since childhood? It had taught her to see what mattered most, the light in human connection, the beauty of compassion, the power of simply choosing to stop for someone in pain. Some things, it turned out, you can only truly see when you learn to look past what's visible.